Alright, let's start. As always, with a short meditation. Just taking your mind into the present and, of course, generating a motivation that helps us to understand these concepts, the concepts we discuss better. First, focus on the breath. And then visualize in the space in front of you Shakyamuni, who's inseparable from your Lama or Lamas, as well as an embodiment of all the enlightened qualities. And an example of what you yourself cannot attain. Also think that you're surrounded by every living being, every sentient being. Based on a sense of care, compassion, and determination. Generate this sincere aspiration to actualize your fullest potential in the form of the awakened state of Buddha. In order to be of the greatest benefit, not only to yourself, but to all sentient beings. Okay, so with this motivation, let's recite the prayer.
Jodan sogi chonanda, chancho badu dani kapsuchi, tagi jinso dipe sonampi, jola penche sange jupa shudu. Sange jodan sogi chonanda, chancho badu dani kapsuchi, tagi jinso dipe sonampi, jola penche sange jupa shudu. Sangye Chodan Chogi Chonanda Chanchu Padu Dani Kapsuchi Lagi Jiso Kipe Sonambi Chola Benche Sangye Chola Shu.
Alright, so yesterday we discussed the relationship between the true truth, in particular the fact that everything is possible because phenomena lack inherent existence. So one of the participants of this course at the very beginning said to me, for instance, well, I did the meditation on the self and my guru, who I feel so close to, I understood this guru doesn't exist inherently, and it got me really scared and really unhappy. because my guru basically disappeared. But of course that's not what we mean with the lack of inherent existence. In fact, the guru is only possible if the guru lacks inherent existence. Otherwise, there would be no relationship between us. The guru couldn't help us. Therefore, it's important to understand the second of the four profundities, that everything is possible if phenomena lack inherent existence. Now, in this context, yesterday, Kwanki reminded me of this, the concept of zero in mathematics, which is said to have its origin, well, in different places. Different mathematicians kind of had ideas of zero, but usually Indian mathematicians, ancient Indian mathematicians, are credited for discovering, I guess you could say, for introducing the concept of zero. What is that in Sanskrit? What is zero in Sanskrit? Does anyone know? Shunya. Instead of shunyata, it's shunya. Interesting, isn't it? So zero, of course, does not mean nothingness. That's important to understand. Zero has, it refers to basically the absence of a quantity in a particular context, right? So it's actually an active participant in mathematical systems. It does not refer to a nothingness. Very important. So everything actually is possible in the mathematical system that we follow. Everything becomes possible because of zero. Think about it. So it's a number with unique properties, which is similar to emptiness. It has unique properties. It's an essential mathematical concept or construct. So for instance, if it's added to another number, it leaves it unchanged. So you think about it, you add 5 and 0, you still have 5. So 5 retains its properties even though you add 0. So therefore, you could say that it's kind of like conventional phenomena are possible because of shunyata. Or here, 5 is always 5 because there's the idea of 0. Nothing added to it, it makes it possible for there to be 5. Or when you multiply 5 by 0, you get 0. And again, you can draw an analogy when you just reflect on emptiness, all that appears to your mind is emptiness and no conventional truth. Now, I'm stretching it a little bit here, but I'm just saying there are some similarities between 0 and shunyata, which doesn't mean nothingness in both cases. Anyway, so it's also a placeholder, of course, 10, 100, 10,000. So our numerical system is a positional numerical system. It depends on where a number is positioned. If it's to the very left and there are 4 numbers next to it, we've got 10,000s. We're talking about 10,000s or more. And so the zeros help us in terms of placeholders. And of course, if you didn't have 0, it would be very difficult to think of minus and plus. You need a reference point. So to have no money as the reference point, to talk about owing money, $5, versus owning money, minus $5. So in that way, it's like a reference point that allows us to talk about depth, or possession, versus temperature, talking about temperature, so minus degrees, plus, minus, freezing degrees, 0, and so forth. So it's really fascinating that there's so many possibilities because of 0. Just as there are all these endless possibilities when we talk about shunyata. So that's, or emptiness. That's something I wanted to talk about as like an analogy, especially since we are so familiar with numbers and mathematics. And as I was coming here, I remember this this kind of funny story. I said before that many of the older Tibetans, younger Tibetans are different. They're well educated. They are very familiar with numbers. When I first started my studies, at that time I translated for one of my teachers, and he was asked by someone to tell him his life story. Like, how many years had he done this, had he done that, etc. So he started telling his story. When he was born, he came from Tibet, he came to India, he went to school from this age to that age. And he told these numbers, he kept and I silently added the numbers, because I knew this was not going to be a spontaneous act of just giving the numbers. So he went on 5 years this, 6 years this, 7 years that. And at some point, he had just told half of his life. And I said, Gimla, you're 96 years old now. It's not adding up. You're 96 already, but you're only halfway through your life, which at that time was like 25. Or maybe a little more, 32 or something, I don't know. But anyway, it's really funny that it's 10 years of this and 20 years of that. And, in our case, we calculate at the same time. We don't have it all straight, but we can kind of get the numbers to a certain... But that just wasn't there. It wasn't the same kind of feeling. So it's just a funny thing. I mean, now, as I said, things have changed. But we're so familiar with numbers, which is why I wanted to introduce the idea of shunya. But I also wanted to talk about something else. And a very fascinating phenomenon in neuroscience. I don't know whether you've heard of I think it's called left brain inventor. Have you heard of the left brain inventor? This is a concept. It was first introduced by an American by two Americans. One of them called Roger Sperry. He was the mentor of someone called Michael Gazzaniga. But Michael Gazzaniga is more known for this particular concept. This talks about split brain patients, which means there are people who suffer from seizures, very serious seizures that are very debilitating. And so sometimes what is done is that the nerve fibers between the two halves of the brain, they are severed. It's called the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum, that's cut. What happens then in people who have this, they call it split brain, what happens is that they no longer communicate with each other, the two parts of the brain. So the two hemispheres, as they're also called. So the left hemisphere is usually associated with language and logic, mainly responsible for explaining what's going on. While the right hemisphere, this is an expert in spatial and emotional processing, but it lacks the language. There can be some language ability, so like symbolism can be used by the right hemisphere, but in terms of putting things into actual like a verbal expression, that's mainly the left hemisphere, which of course is reversed when it comes to the side of our body that relate to these hemispheres, if you like. And for those where this is cut, the brain sometimes does different things without awareness. So if you put something in the visual field that is responsible for the left hemisphere, and you put something in the visual field that is responsible for the right hemisphere, different things are perceived. There's no communication, which can lead to absurd things. One hand wants to open a door and the other one tries to hinder it from doing it, right? Because the hands are associated with the respective hemispheres, and contradictory actions are done. But the most interesting part of this is that now the left hemisphere, when it finds out about what the right hemisphere has done, tries to explain it, tries to make sense of it, makes up a story, which is basically the labeling part. It reminds me of labeling. It's like it tries to it makes things coherent tries to bring in like a relationship between the two, even if it doesn't exist. So when the two brains, they're different consciousnesses at work. But since they're not linked, there's no conscious awareness of the two being actually linked. I mean, there's no awareness of that. They do their own thing, and that's when it seems there are two people active. There's no longer that, the storytelling only happens in the left hemisphere. That's still able to talk about it. So anything that happens on the right hemisphere, the person can't talk about, can't express it. Only when the left hemisphere is made aware of it, it makes a story of it. But that's not necessarily what happened on the right hemisphere. So the one example I remember is the left hemisphere becomes aware of a chicken foot. So then the person is asked to draw a relation or like to an association with that chicken foot. So then the answer is a chicken. Fair enough. And then the right side is shown, or in relation to the right side, what is shown is snow. And again, the person is asked, what is associated with snow? A shovel, to shovel the snow. I mean, I don't know how to put it, but anyway, so to free the driveway from snow. And then the right hemisphere is informed of the shovel, that the left hemisphere is informed of the right hemisphere's reaction in terms of the shovel, and says, oh yeah, I was talking about cleaning the chicken den. So it's making up the story when actuality. So when the left hemisphere is basically activated in terms of saying the right hemisphere said such and such, then it makes up the story, tries to connect the two. So creating a story of a self, basically, of a consistency, of some coherency, that there's this one person there, when actually, in this case, isn't there. It seems like two people occupying this body, this brain. And so this person in particular, Michael Gazzaniga, his theory is that there is no self. It comes up with a similar theory as the Buddhist, that there's no monolithic entity that's the brain, like that's the person, because the brain doesn't exist in that way. So very much this theory, because of the split brain syndrome, that at least two consciousnesses can be active at the same time and can do their own thing. And it's only because of this connection in our brain that it is possible, therefore, to give the left brain the opportunity to spin this reality. I mean, spin reality means to label. First of all, to label, to get some coherent sense of our reality, to label, and then because of our misperception, we perceive it to exist inherently, and not just a labeling that takes place. Now, of course, we may think, well, that's really the brain doing it. That's the question. What comes first? The mind trying to explain things, the brain, of course, making it possible, but still, first there's the mental explanation, and that then shows the activity in the brain. Or is it first the activity in the brain and then the mental action? If it were the second case, then any kind of research, neuroscientific research on meditation would mean first your brain meditates and then your mind does. But it's actually the other way around, isn't it? You meditate, and that creates new pathways, neurotransmitters are released and so forth, so that there's some change in the brain. Really, it is mind over brain. The mind influences our brain. Anyway, I wanted to introduce that as an interesting idea of even how neuroscience can actually, there's even neuroscientific research on the fact that there is no self the way we think of it. And the mentor of Michael Gazzaniga, since he started this research on the split brain, a man called Roger Sperry, actually got a Nobel Prize for that in medicine. Well, he shared it with others, but still he got a Nobel Prize in medicine for his contribution to the split brain research. So this is considered huge. And I suppose it continues on, and better understandings of what the self is will develop. Okay. Anyway, so that was just something I wanted to share with you. There are more details on this, but there's no point in going into them because they don't really support our understanding. What I want to do tomorrow, I think I'll easily finish this text tomorrow. I mean, I'll do my 4 pages today, see how far we get. Tomorrow I want to also talk a little bit more about practical things, of how what we can learn, it can help us in our interactions with others, for instance. How we can even deal with difficult situations, maybe even criticize another person, or maybe, criticize has a negative connotation, but telling them how we feel without hurting their feeling. There are some psychological effective ways, and oftentimes it's because of our misapprehension of reality that our criticism is not constructive and is easily misconstrued and easily misunderstood and leads to a lot of problems. So that I'd like to talk about this. I don't know, Singapore people, I'm not sure Singapore society or culture is, I don't see you as very critical of each other. I think you're very gentle with each other, but I could be wrong. Maybe your boss. So there's a certain hierarchy, I guess, as in every society. So of course a boss may actually be quite critical, but usually in your interaction you seem pretty gentle with each other. But criticism again can be very gentle. There is a very constructive, good way that the other person may even be grateful for hearing criticism. And there are also a few other things I'd like to address. Anyway, so that's for tomorrow, and we have more time. Okay, so let's look again at these 3 criteria. I talked about conventional existence, which is of course really important to understand, since after the explanation of emptiness, and even with the explanation of the true truth, there's a bit of a sense that existence has become more difficult, right? First of all, when we hear of the lack of inherent existence, it is easy to misunderstand it to mean nothing exists. Then we're introduced to, of course, the conventional truth. But even that seems to imply that ultimate truth are more real, or ultimate truth are more existent, if you like. Because we're told ultimate truth are truth, while conventional truth are not truth, but only true from the perspective of a wrong consciousness. In terms of how the words are explained, that's how the true truth are explained. So again, after having heard about the conventional truth and the explanation of the term conventional truth, it kind of seems like they're less real. Maybe kind of not really existent. But then with these 3 criteria here, already as part of the relationship of the true truth, we're introduced to the idea that they're equally existent because one depends on the other. They have this very close relationship. But to even strengthen the sense that both truth exist equally, this last concept here of the 3 criteria is introduced. I'm saying last because the very last section of this text deals with how people perceive conventional truth once they have eliminated ignorance. So it's a slightly different, the text goes in a slightly different direction. Anyway, having said this, so it's important to understand that both truths are equally existent. Very important. Have an equal way in which they are valid, but that they exist in terms of different awarenesses and a different domain of existence, which supports each other. Okay, so let's look at this. Anyway, so the first criterion, yesterday was already quite late, so I didn't want to confuse you too much. But when it says it is known to a conventional consciousness. The English word known here is not a literal translation. It's not a literal translation, because the literal translation would be, it is renowned to a conventional consciousness. Now that sounds terrible. That's not good English. To be renowned to, I mean, someone can be renowned in society, of course, but to be renowned to a concept, that sounds so odd. And so, when I prepared this material, I had a hard time finding a good term. So I looked at the different translations, and renowned certainly wasn't a good choice. Some would use that word. But then I came across the translation of Geshe Sopa's commentary on the Great Lamrim, again called Steps on the Path to Enlightenment. So the volume on Special Insight, it was translated by a good friend of mine. She was also a student at the Institute of Buddhist Dialectics. She studied there until Madhyamaka, and then she discontinued her studies there, but she's become a very good translator. She's an English woman. She's no longer a nun, she used to be, and just an amazing, outstanding translator. According to I perceive her as such an amazing translator. She did the second volume on the science and philosophy in Tibetan Buddhism. I know you have the first volume here. She did the second volume, and I think she did a great job. Anyway, so she used the word no. And I'm sure she double-checked with Geshe Sopa on this. So she used the word no, that usually is translated to, or is used to translate another Tibetan term, which means to incontrovertibly know. So it's a bit like it is known to a conventional consciousness. It's known to it. So a conventional consciousness is familiar with it, takes it to mind. So in that way, it really accords with what is meant here. And then Geshe Sopa's explanation also supports that. Sometimes a little difficult to understand the first one, the first criterion, but like I said, I based my explanation mainly on what Geshe Sopa said. So a conventional consciousness, etc. Yeah, so a conventional consciousness here, it doesn't necessarily know its object, but it is known to the mind. Okay? And that includes anything that exists or doesn't exist. So if you see on page 37, I don't know when I read this yesterday, I think I explained it at least. Furthermore, just below the illustration, furthermore, despite being a conventional consciousness, it can also think of ultimate truth without first engaging in ultimate analysis, because when ordinary people hear a teaching on emptiness, they can take emptiness as an object of study and learn to differentiate it from other objects, of course, in a rough sense. Of course, this is not sufficient to produce an incontrovertible understanding of emptiness, which requires ultimate analysis, but it's enough to make it an object of our thoughts. So anything can be taken to mind, whether existent or not. It can be known to our mind. So important is, though, please note that although anything that is conventionally existent satisfies the first criterion, not everything that satisfies the first criterion necessarily exists conventionally or exists in general. Therefore, the second and third criteria are needed since they preclude anything that is non-existent. So now to make this split, what is it that exists? What is it that doesn't exist? Which helps us to understand that conventional truth equally exists because they fulfill the three criteria. Okay. All right. So the second criterion of conventional existence. The second criterion for a phenomenon to be conventionally existent is that it is not contradicted or negated by a conventional valid cognizer. Conventional truths such as living beings, consciousnesses, bodies, trees, and so forth are not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer, since there are no conventional minds that realize or incontrovertibly know the non-existence of these objects. Okay, so if you look at, for instance, a tree, it seems a little contradictory, possibly, that on one hand we say it's merely labeled as a tree. It doesn't exist in and of itself as a tree. In fact, it appears to us uniquely with a unique color, based on which there's an appearance of a shape, but we know the way it appears to our mind, it doesn't exist out there. It doesn't have a color for that matter. And if something doesn't have a color, the way we perceive it, it doesn't have shape. So it is a very subjective appearance to our mind. And nonetheless, we say it exists. It performs a function. It exists conventionally. And it is labeled. We label tree on the basis of its parts, of independence on the different appearances to our mind. If we look for the tree-ness, we won't be able to find it. Okay. So, in a way it seems it's kind of made up by the mind. Kind of. After our sense of phenomena exist objectively out there, now this explanation that it was just labeled by our mind seems to not be enough to say it exists. That's our usual tendency, just because our mind is so used to that one extreme view. Introducing it to this other view is initially difficult. And then hearing that there is a way by which we can say it exists versus it doesn't. So there's a conventional valid cognizer. Then when we think about it, okay, so the tree is merely labeled, but it's not labeled without depending on anything. It depends on a valid basis of designation, which includes, for instance, the most important characteristics of a tree that help us to distinguish it from everything that is not a tree. So in other words, there's a definition of a tree. There's a definition that we all agree with. Of course, on a very subtle level, we may disagree. There may be, is a tomato a fruit or a vegetable? Right? So, to give you the example, instead of the tree, I would say it's a vegetable. In India, everyone uses it as a vegetable. I haven't eaten a fruit salad with a tomato in it so far. But officially, I guess from its biological, in terms of its biological structure, it's seen as a fruit, isn't it? But anyway, leaving that aside. So the point is, with a tree, for instance, there may, of course, be disagreements. Is a certain particular object a tree or not? Is it a bush or not? Etc. But in general, I think we have, as a convention, as per the convention that we use, the conventions we use, we can pretty much all agree on what is a tree. So there's society that has agreed on the definition of an object we call tree. And the definition really just means the main characteristics that make it unique or that help us to distinguish it from something that is not a tree. That is its basis of imputation based on which we say tree. So we can, therefore, use a valid cognizer, a valid mind that can check what appears to me. Are these main characteristics or not? And is it therefore correct to call it a tree or not? That's basically a mind that determines that a tree is a tree, although it's merely labeled. Does that make sense? Right? So although it's merely labeled, it's not randomly calling something a tree and calling it a newspaper the next day or what have you, but instead using the main characteristics as a basis for labeling, and then having labeled, to use any kind of object that has similar characteristics that we therefore also call tree, and check whether it accords with these characteristics and therefore is a tree. Does that make sense? Okay. So, That's why we can say conventional truths such as living beings, consciousnesses, bodies, trees, and so forth are not contradicted by a valid cognizer because there are no conventional minds that realize the non-existence of these objects. I mean, non-existence on my table. Okay, that's all right. I can know the non-existence of a tree on my table, but there is no mind that perceives in general the non-existence of table, because tables exist. Right? Instead, what is a correct mind? A correct mind is a mind that perceives the existence of trees. It couldn't be a correct mind that knows the non-existence of trees. Okay. So therefore, trees are not contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. This is simply because these objects exist, and therefore their non-existence cannot be known or realized. Okay. Moreover, not only do conventional valid cognizers not contradict conventional truth, they also do not contradict ultimate truth, emptiness. They don't contradict emptiness, or the emptiness of the chair, the emptiness of the cup, my emptiness. No, they don't contradict these ultimate truth, such as the emptiness of a living being, the emptiness of a consciousness, and so on. The reason is the same as before. There are no conventional valid cognizers that realize the non-existence of this ultimate truth. Because they're just not in their domain of perception. Conventional minds, they don't think about ultimate, in general, it's not in the domain of their understanding. If they're in the domain of their understanding, they're not called conventional valid cognizers. So a conventional valid cognizer doesn't take to mind emptiness, at least it can. Well, a conventional mind can take to mind emptiness, but a conventional valid cognizer, no, it couldn't know emptiness because it's a different type of mind. Just as an ear consciousness cannot know shape and color. Yes? Yes?
So, the key characteristic that we talked about just now,
yes.
What's the difference between this and the essence that you spoke about yesterday, last night? The essence of the object.
Essence of the object. What's the difference between the essence of an object from the point of view of the Svatantrika? Okay, go ahead, please. Yeah. Please repeat your question just for the recording. Yeah.
Just now you talked about the trees, right? The key characteristic of trees.
Yes.
So it's sort of like define the tree.
Right.
So there's something from the tree. It's not only a mere imputation, right? Something, some characteristic from the tree. So I'm sure there's a difference between this and the essence that you spoke about yesterday, last night.
Yes.
Svatantrika.
All right. So the Svatantrika school says that the tree is findable on the basis of its parts. If you look for something, you find an essence. But the characteristics are not the tree. The main characteristics, so this is your second question, or basically when you started off, you talked about an essence, right? So the essence, when we talk about an essence, a tree-ness, right? But none of the main characteristics of the tree-ness. There's something other than the tree. So the Svatantrika school says there's an inherent tree because you find a tree. When you look for a tree long enough, you find something that is the actual tree, which doesn't depend on anything. That's what the Svatantrika school says. So you find, for instance, in the case of a person, I'm just an imputed person, the Svatantrika school would say. But there is an actual person. There's an actual person that when you look for the person, you can find them. What is that? The mental consciousness. That's the real person. That's what they say. That's the person. That's the substantially existent person. Similarly, they say, when you look for the substantial, so the tree is imputed on the basis of something other than itself, but if you look for the actual tree, when you search for the inherent tree, the inherent existence of the tree, you find an actual substantial tree. Only in this case, they don't say what it actually is, because it's not as simple as with the mental consciousness. So some would say the only thing you find is some partless particle, but that's only possible if it's made of particles, if an object is. So anyway, it's very difficult for the Svatantika to answer the question. Now, from Prasangika school point of view, the characteristics are not the tree. The characteristics, what are the characteristics? A stem, branches, a certain size of them, leaves. Okay. So none of those are the tree. But are they coming from the side of the object? Are these characteristics from the side of the object? No, they're also merely labeled. Take any of these parts. Take a leaf. Where's the leaf within the leaf? Is this part the leaf? Is this pointy kind of part? If it's a pointy leaf, is this part, is that part the leaf? Where's the leaf in the leaf? Take it apart, you don't find a leaf. Take the stem. Take it, cut it into little pieces, mentally or physically. Where's the stem within the stem? Can't be found. The branches. So conventionally we say there are these parts, these definitions of a tree that serve as the basis to label tree. So we're kind of happy, okay, got a tree there, because it seems after we accept that the tree is merely labeled, to our mind, when we don't think about it thoroughly enough, at least the basis of invitation, that is truly part of the tree. Then we realize, no, none of these parts exist inherently either. They're also merely labeled. Merely labeled. And then if arranged in a certain way, these merely labeled parts, we label them tree. But when analyzing the leaves, the branches, we can't find it. Then the branches and the branches, they're also merely labeled on their parts. Then you take the parts of the branches, can't find those parts. And you end up basically looking at the atoms that make up the branches, the stem, the leaves, and so forth. And even those atoms cannot be found. You can go endlessly. You always find something other than themselves. And understand they were merely labeled on that. Which is why the Svatantika goes, oh, that can't be right. You have something out of nothing. Every time you search for it, you don't find anything. So they say, like, oh, at the end you find something. But they have a hard time saying what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but still,
yeah, of course.
especially if you add the function onto it, then it's become very difficult because
the function seems to be a little bit more real than the leaves, etc. But what is the function? When the wind blows, or things grow from it, right? But again, growing, that is merely labeled. Previously it was not there, now it's there, we label growing. Right? And then we say, oh, within the tree there was the potential for an apple to grow. Where's the potential in the tree? Merely labeled based on the fact that first there was no apple, now there is an apple. We label potential. So we say, oh, it's the genetic material of the, okay, but where exactly does it say apple is going to come from me? That is just labeled. Right? And in fact, each moment is different from the previous moment. If you think of subtle impermanence, every moment of the tree is changing constantly. So I think of tree the whole time as if they were a constant, non-changing object, because I happen to call it tree all the time. But each moment of tree is totally different from the previous moment of tree. Totally different in that the atoms have completely changed. Just because it's similar enough, I keep calling it tree. So how could there be some essential function when even these functions are constantly different? It sways in the tree, in the wind. That is one of its functions. Well, it's different moments in time, right? Sometimes it's here and there and there and there, different, moments in time. I label it sways in the wind. No essential swaying to be found. It provides apples. Well, right now it doesn't have any apples, but I still say this tree provides apples. I label it in terms of what in the future will happen. May happen, may not happen. Maybe the tree is felled before it produces apple. but I label it's an apple tree on the basis of what could potentially happen without being able to find the potential. Right? So when we don't analyze, everything makes sense. When we analyze, everything disappears. Right?
So you say it's
Okay, can you please? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it's subtle impermanence in transitory.
Subtle impermanence?
And it's transitory because everything is
Transitory?
changing moment by moment.
Transitory. Oh, yes. Transitory. Absolutely. It's totally transitory. So subtle impermanence, understanding subtle impermanence is very, very helpful in terms of understanding emptiness. Our view of self, the left hemisphere, remember? Producing the sense of a continuity. The self was there yesterday, the self is there today. But in actuality, it's a totally different self every time. When you think about it, it's a different mind, it's a different body, and only because we continuously call it self, and our mind continuously think of it as self, there's a sense of continuity, or a sense of, no, better word would be a sense of sameness. That's exactly why I feel this I that walked into this room is the same as the I right now. But actually it's a different person altogether. It's just because my left hemisphere keeps saying I do this, I. Because of this use of language, and my mind, therefore, my mental consciousness is doing so therefore my left hemisphere does so. My mental consciousness keeps thinking I, or has at least the appearance of I, right? And because it's the same label I refer to myself, there's a sense it's the same, because it was the I when I came in and it's the I now. Just because I use the same label to refer to it, just because my language, or to talk about the brain, my language area of my brain uses the same term, which is just a rough term, I have a sense of a permanent I. Thank you very much. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. To clarify on the first criteria of conventional existence,
Yes.
is it saying that anything that appears to the conceptual consciousness of a sentient being mind, which is like aka my mind,
Yes.
or it has to be generally accepted? Because for example, right?
Yeah.
That's like Mickey Mouse ears on your head.
Mm-hmm. If I had Mickey Mouse ears on my head.
So to my mind, is there because my mind can
visualize Mickey Mouse ears on my head. Yeah.
But it's only in my mind.
Right.
Then it's not generally accepted. If I go and
no, you see, like the first criterion, you can anything can be is part of this first criterion.
So Mickey Mouse ears is still under conventionally.
Is known to a conventional consciousness, yes, to your conventional consciousness, and to everyone else's, I hope, right now.
So it's still conventionally existent.
No, because just fulfilling the first criterion is not enough to be conventionally existent. That's the thing. With the Mickey Mouse ears, I'm just imagining it right away because my nieces and nephew have this funny app where you actually have Mickey Mouse ears. So the point is, the first criterion, you can actually leave that out. You don't have to mention it. Why? Because it includes everything. Everything that exists, but also everything that doesn't exist. Everything you take to mind, or any of us take to mind, there's no limit to what your mind can create that is not realistic, such as Mickey Mouse ears on my head. So that is an example of the first criterion, which just shows us anything can be taken to mind. Based on that first criterion, you understand anything can be taken to mind. There's no limit. I think that's what it implies. I haven't seen a reason for citing it, but logically I think the reason for citing the first criterion is just to show you can take to mind anything. Our mind not only has the ability to know that it exists,
switch off.
Yeah, it's off.
Switch off.
It's off.
Yes.
It's switched off.
Okay, yeah, it's working. All right. The criteria. So not only is our mind able to know anything that exists, it has that ability to know. It can also make things up. It can make up anything. And if only you think of myself having Mickey Mouse ears, no one else does, then that's, again, something known to a conventional consciousness, your conventional consciousness. So anything is possible. Which on one hand is great. It can make up anything. It helps artists to create incredible things that right now may not exist, but they bring into existence. For a writer, etc., this ability. But on the other hand, of course, we can be led astray by the things that don't exist, believing that they do, in particular when it comes to inherent existence. So it has advantages and disadvantages. So learning exactly what exists and what does not exist, so we're not led astray, is essential in Buddhism. But that doesn't mean we cannot be made aware of the fact anything can be taken to mind. Does that make sense? Yeah, those are important points that you made, all of you. Yes, please, Calvin. I'll stop calling you Kale.
Is there an example of something that does not fulfill the first criteria?
Sorry, I switched off my thing when you talk. Is there anything that does not fulfill the first criterion? Please think. Is there anything that does not fulfill the first criterion? Anyone?
What the Buddha thinks?
What the Buddha thinks? Oh.
Because she's not sentient being.
Okay, so is there any other? All right, that's true, you could say. No, but actually, anything that the Buddha takes to mind, sentient beings can also take to mind. Knowing or not knowing is a different matter. But theoretically, you could at least take it to mind. Okay, but all right, this is debatable. This is debatable, but never mind. But here, a conventional mind could even include a Buddha's mind, although I spoke more precisely about a conceptual mind, but even the Buddha's mind could take to mind anything. I mean, the mind's ability is to do that.
I switched mine off.
I'm outside.
So we can keep it. So, how about emptiness? Yeah, conventional mind can take to mind emptiness, as we've heard before, right? You can just talk about it and hear.
Not the convention, it's the emptiness of emptiness.
Oh, the emptiness of emptiness. Well, you can also just think about that with the conventional mind without fully understanding it. The debate could be like, is it really the emptiness of emptiness? But, having some rough sense without going into kind of extremes such it doesn't exist at all, I guess you could even take to mind emptiness or the emptiness of emptiness, just roughly take it to mind. Yeah, but without understanding it, having a kind of coarse, rough sense of it. I mean, that is debatable, but still, I mean, in the end, anything can be taken to the mind, right? Calvin? Yeah.
So there's nothing that...
Yeah, it's on.
There's nothing that does not fulfill the first criteria.
Yeah, there's nothing that does not fulfill the first criterion.
So what is the significance of the first criterion?
Yeah.
As I said earlier, to show that although in order for it to exist, it has to exist conventionally, but just having a mind perceiving it doesn't mean it exists. So anything can be taken to mind. To just show, I don't know, honestly, I don't know, because I've heard different explanations. That's very interesting. There's certain ideas in Buddhism If you ask 5 Geshes, you get 5 different answers. Because, and none of the answers are incorrect, but it's kind of really hard to say it's exactly this. So the most important questions, you always get the same answer. So emptiness is explained in the same way. But I asked this, and I got different answers. But the answer that I find most satisfactory, that makes most sense to me personally, is that just understanding that whether existent or not, anything can be taken to mind. So our mind doesn't necessarily know what exists. I mean, it's not like every mind knows what exists and what doesn't exist. It cannot necessarily distinguish. On one hand, it can be led astray by the wrong minds that you're not aware they're wrong consciousnesses and believe something exists when it doesn't. On the other hand, you have the ability to go beyond what doesn't exist and consciously visualize. For instance, there are the 3 types of bodhicitta, of which only one is realistic. Do you know the 3 types of bodhicitta? Certain analogies are used to refer to them. Ferryman-like, king-like, and shepherd-like. Okay. So, or to give you another, okay, first I should explain that. So, shepherd-like bodhicitta is when you visualize, you take all sentient beings to enlightenment together. You are responsible for leading all sentient beings, including yourself. Oh, no. You lead them first. You let them go first, just as the shepherd walks behind, for instance, his sheep. Not for instance, it is sheep. So shepherd goes behind the sheep, and that leads all sentient beings to enlightenment first. So this kind of thought, I let everyone first become enlightened and I go last. Right? Or this visualization or this aspiration, like a ferryman-like bodhicitta. So like on a ferry, you all reach the other shore together. But that's not realistic. You can't lead all sentient beings to enlightenment without becoming enlightened first. So king-like bodhicitta, like a king walks in front of his subjects, so that is the only realistic type. But you can train your mind in love and compassion that you visualize you take everyone first to enlightenment, and you be the last one to enjoy the bliss of awakening. Or Donglen. Meditation on Donglen, visualizing you taking on the suffering of all sentient beings. Sorry, it's not going to happen. Now, this shows us our mind can be controlled by our wrong views, so we need the second and the third criterion. Plus, our mind has the ability to even visualize things that are not real, but being aware that they are not real, they can still be helpful in our practice. So these are all reasons you could think of as just pointing that out to us in the form of the first criterion. But also with the first criterion, everything is included that can be taken to mind. There's no, as in Tibetan it says, there's no limit to the misperceptions you can have. In other words, to the things you can imagine to be there, to exist. But then you have the second and third criterion to filter out, right? And here you then filter out in terms of their affiliation. Affiliated to conventional truth, affiliated with conventional truth, and affiliated with ultimate truth. You draw that distinction. Now, in the first case, we have in the second criterion. In the case of the second criterion, in the second criterion, we've heard that conventional objects that do exist are not negated by this mind. Secondly, we heard that even emptiness is not negated by that mind, which is why conventional valid cognizers don't have a problem with emptiness. In other words, don't negate the existence of emptiness, although they're very valid. And what is negated by a valid conventional cognizer, or by a conventional valid cognizer, what is negated by a valid conventional cognizer doesn't exist. But emptiness is not negated by it. So what is negated? Not even inherent existence is negated by a conventional valid cognizer. Not even inherent existence. But what is actually negated? Okay. So, first of all, no conventional truth are negated, emptiness is not negated. By contrast, something that does not exist, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. That's a little funny. Something that does not exist, and the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. Does that make sense? So, give me an example of something that does not exist. Inherent existence. Is the non-existence of inherent existence a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? It's an ultimate truth. The non-existence of inherent existence is emptiness. The non-existence of inherent existence. So the non-existence of inherent existence, the lack of inherent existence, the absence, they all mean the same thing. Except in English, in Tibetan, you actually say the non-existence. Just go up. No, I have to think. No, you don't say that. You say empty of inherent existence. That's how you usually talk about emptiness, or when you describe the lack of. In English, it's become common to say the lack of inherent existence. Although that's not a good word, because the lack kind of means it should be there, but it's not there, right? It's kind of like the lack. It's really weird. Absence works well. Empty actually works as well. So empty of inherent existence. But it's not incorrect to say non-existence of inherent existence. It's also emptiness. The non-existence of inherent existence is emptiness. Yeah. So never to remember. Yeah, that's emptiness. It works in Tibetan as well. All right. But can you give me an example of something that doesn't exist, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth? So something that doesn't exist in general, but its non-existence exists, right?
Skyflower.
Skyflower. A skyflower. A flower, not a flower that someone threw up in the sky, but a skyflower is usually defined as something that grows in the sky. Doesn't exist. But the non-existence of a skyflower exists. The non-existence of a skyflower is something that exists. Is it a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Is it an ultimate truth? Raise your hand if you think it's an ultimate truth. No. Raise your hand if you think it's a conventional truth. You have to raise your hand at some point. No, I'm kidding. All right. It's a conventional truth, right? So the absence of skyflower is a conventional truth. All right. So likewise here, by contrast, something that does not exist, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, such as the horns of a rabbit. I went the easy example. Horns of a rabbit. Or a permanent situation. There's no permanent situation. A situation is changing. Cannot be permanent. So, the horns of a rabbit or a permanent situation is contradicted by conventional valid cognizers. Why? Because there are conventional minds realizing that a rabbit does not have horns, although its ears may appear as horns from a distance. That's the example. Yeah, it's not a jackalope in the US. They talk about jackalopes and these pictures. Someone sent me a card once with a jackalope. It looks like a rabbit, but I think they took the entheses, are they called entheses, from like a deer? Like the horns. Okay, they took the horns and they stuck them on that rabbit, and they stuffed the rabbit and they called it a jackalope. So people were like, it exists. Horns of a rabbit exists. And someone sent me this postcard from the United States. But those are not the horns we're looking for. This is just fake. I mean, they're not actually having horns. But no, this is not what we mean with horns. It's not like the ears are here and the horns are there. It's the ears are misperceived from afar. Someone may believe those are horns, especially when they're kind of bent over. They look like horns from afar for someone who has never seen a rabbit, right? Okay. I'm thinking more of the bunny rabbit, like the Easter bunny. Rabbits don't even have ears coming, they're more like towards the back. But anyway, never mind. Okay, so the point is the non-existence of a conventional truth exists. Sorry, the non-existence of something which doesn't exist is a conventional truth. So, for instance, again, the situation cannot be permanent. So, therefore, the non-existence of a permanent situation is a conventional truth. The situation cannot be permanent because it changes moment by moment. Okay, so I put a little note here. So, although, a little footnote, I think it's the only footnote, although the horns of a rabbit do not exist, the non-existence of the horns of a rabbit does exist. The non-existence of the horns of a rabbit can be known. It is an object of knowledge and thus exists. However, it's not an ultimate truth, but a conventional truth. Okay, so I've already said that. I need to read it. However, not everything that is non-existent is contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Does that make sense? Not everything. An example is the inherent existence of the self, or of anything else that exists. So the inherent existence of the self, the inherent existence of anything else that exists, the inherent existence of a tree, inherent existence of a forest, inherent existence of you and me. Because the non-existence or lack of inherent existence of a phenomenon is not realized by a conventional mind. Right? In general, emptiness does not fall within the cognitive domain of a conventional mind. A conventional cognizer only cognizes conventional phenomena. So, therefore, emptiness does not fall within, in general, in the cognitive domain of a conventional mind. It falls within the cognitive domain of an ultimate consciousness. And here we are only talking about not being contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Alright, so it's a little complicated. We have things that exist that are conventional truth, things that exist that are ultimate truth, things that don't exist, the non-existence of which are conventional truth, and things that do not exist, the non-existence of which are ultimate truth. Sounds very complicated, right? But really it's like you can divide them into those things that exist and those that do not exist. The things that exist are either conventional truth or ultimate truth, and of those that do not exist, there are those, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, and the non-existence of which is an ultimate truth. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So there are things, first of all, everything that exists can be divided into two truths, that's clear. And then there are things, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, is, for instance, non-existence of sky cloud. And then an example of something, non-existence of which is an ultimate truth, is my inherent existence. Right? Okay. And so of these four categories, which one can a conventional valid cognizer contradict? Of these four, how many of these categories can it contradict? You can say 1, 2, 3, or 4. You can raise your hand. How many of these categories that I just mentioned, conventional truth, ultimate truth, non-existence is the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, non-existence is the non-existence of which is an ultimate truth, which of these categories can a conventional valid cognizer contradict? How many of these categories? 1, 2, 3, or all of them? You can go 1, 2, 3, or 4. So just tell me your opinion. All right. Okay. I've seen a few fingers. Okay, more fingers. A little low, but still there. How many categories can it contradict? How many categories can it contradict? Go through all four of them. Can it contradict conventional truth? Can it know the non-existence of conventional truth? That one's gone. Can it know the non-existence of ultimate truth? That one's gone. So who thinks that there are two? Who thinks there's one? Alright. Sorry, I'm getting too fast. Okay, I'll say it a little slower. We have the 4 categories of phenomena. Sorry, that was my fault. You have the 4 categories of phenomena. Phenomena that are part of the category conventional truth. Then you have the categories ultimate truth. Then you have the category of non-phenomena, that which doesn't exist. I said phenomena. So you have 4 categories. The category of conventional truth, the category of ultimate truth. And then, with regard to everything that doesn't exist, you can categorize those in terms of the non-existence of which is a conventional truth and the non-existence of which is an ultimate truth. You all agree, right? Mm-hmm. So, which of these 4 categories can... Yeah, now you got it. Which of the 4 categories can the conventional valid cognizer contradict? Contradict, yeah. Negate. Negate means it can know the non-existence of that. The non-existence of conventional truth cannot be known because conventional truth exists. So their non-existence cannot be understood, right? It would be wrong to say they don't exist. So to contradict means to negate, means to know its non-existence. So conventional truth cannot be contradicted by a valid cognizer, by a conventional valid cognizer. Ultimate truth can also not be contradicted by a valid conventional cognizer, because these 2 exist. Their non-existence cannot be known. So all you're left with are the 2 categories, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, and the non-existence of which is an ultimate truth. But a conventional valid cognizer cannot know the non-existence of inherent existence. So that category is also gone. So it's really just those phenomena, the non-existence of which are a conventional truth. So there were quite a few single fingers, some higher, some lower, but yes. So you're right, just 1 category. Okay, 1 category, which is the non-existent. Well, it's not even because they don't exist. It's hard to say they're a category. But anyway, we can still talk about a category of those things, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. That can be contradicted. Those non-existences, they can be contradicted by the conventional valid cognizer. So in other words, once over rabbits, sky flowers, permanent situations, what else? Flying cows, Donald Trump on my table right now. All non-existences, right? Okay, good. Right. I keep saying Donald Trump. Why? Because I tell you why. Because in the past I would say vase on my table. And then someone said, well, how do you know Amitabha doesn't sit there with his vase? And I'm like, yeah, I don't actually know that Amitabha sits there with his vase. I don't know there's no vase. But Donald Trump is someone who's not invisible. So if you were here, you would sit on my table. That's why I keep saying Donald Trump. It's not a political statement. Okay. And here you can see again in the drawing, it is not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. I know why you're confused, because I use the word not. Not. We're not used to thinking in negatives, so we get slightly confused. So anything that exists conventionally is not contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Which means, in other words, its non-existence is not realized by a valid cognizer that does not arise in dependence on ultimate analysis. That does not arise in dependence. You see, even I get confused. That does not. Of course I get confused. Not just, but I wrote it, so I should not get confused. So its non-existence is not realized by a valid cognizer that does not arise in dependence on ultimate analysis. So those conventional valid cognizer, which do not arise in dependence on ultimate analysis, they if they perceive the non-existence of something, then it is contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. Right? It's a little complicated. Is it too complicated to understand? Or did you not read in advance? No, I'm kidding. It's too late now anyway. No, but I hope it's not too... You probably just need to relax. Just sit down, have a good cup of whatever. Really relax. When your mind is very relaxed, then when you read it, it makes sense. If you try to... Yeah, right now you're tired and... Okay. Anyway, but here, if you read this again at home, please do it at home. Just look at the illustration. It's not much for you to do, but read it one more time. So conventional truth are not contradicted by this. Ultimate truth are not contradicted by this mind. Inherent existence is not contradicted. Here you have the four categories. Only something, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth, is contradicted by them. You've got the summary once more, from everything I said. Therefore, in order to exclude inherent existence from the category of conventional existence, a third criterion is required. Okay, so you need, the first two truths cannot be contradicted by it, but it's not enough to say for something to exist, it must not be contradicted by a conventional valid cognizer. You need another criterion, in other words. Because if you didn't have another criterion, inherent existence would exist. Right? You need a third criterion. The first one you don't need. Logically, it would be okay without it, because it includes everything that exists and doesn't exist. But it's still helpful to have it to understand what I said earlier. Really, you just need the two last criteria. So what is the third criterion of conventional existence? The third criterion for a phenomenon to be conventional existence is that it is not contradicted or invalidated by the correct analysis of suchness. Since such ultimate analysis gives rise to an ultimate valid cognizer, the third criterion can also be formulated to stipulate that a phenomenon is not contradicted or negated by an ultimate valid cognizer. Right? Before we said in the second, with regard to the second criterion, it's not contradicted, or it's not in contradiction, or its non-existence cannot be understood by a conventional valid cognizer. Now we're saying its non-existence, as the third criterion, its non-existence cannot be known by ultimate valid cognizer. That's the third criterion. Because inherent existence needs to now be eliminated. Okay. I see some confusion. This is the first time I see confusion in this class. On your faces. Yeah. Don't worry about it. I mean, this is about, I promise you, if you read this 3 times and you take your time, you have your tea in between, you'll understand. Don't read it 3 times and then go. No. This is something, the mind is amazing, really. You read it 1 time, you take a break, it sinks in, right? Then you read it 1 more time, it's even better. And the 3rd or 4th time, maybe you need to read it a 4th time after breaks in between, you'll understand it. It's just that not, which is that's confusing. Yeah. But you all have the capacity. You understood everything else I said. You have the capacity to understand this. Yeah. Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yes, please, Calvin. Yeah. Is it switched on? If you tap it.
Hello. Yes. For the lower school, they define existence as that which is realized by a valid cognizer. So what's the short form of that? Instead of all this not.
Okay, all right. Yeah, the negations are a little complicated, but without negations it doesn't work. So Calvin basically said, okay, in the lower schools and also in the higher school, something that is known by a valid cognizer is the definition of existent. Okay. Now this is simple. We only need to think about things that exist. How do we know they exist? Because they're known by a valid cognizer. So far, we don't have a problem. And if you then divide phenomena into conventional truth and ultimate truth, you divide the mind that perceives each category into conventional valid cognizers and ultimate valid cognizer. So far, I didn't lose any of you, right? Following what I said. But what did I bring in? How do you know that something doesn't exist? Right? You were just asking, how do I know that something exists? That's easy. That's true. We don't use negation, so it's fine. But how do I know that something doesn't exist? That's when it becomes difficult. Right? How do I know? Horns over rabbit. How do I know there's no ghost in my closet? How do I know there is no ghost in my closet? By opening the door and looking inside. What do I come to realize? I realize the non-existence of a ghost in my closet. In other words, my valid cognizer negates a ghost. It negates it. That's another way of saying knows it doesn't exist. A ghost in my closet is contradicted by my consciousness that perceives the inside of my closet. That makes sense, doesn't it? So it's a little bit more tangible. You all visualize this ghost. We all seen ghost movies, right? So you open the door. If it were a ghost, we have some understanding of what it would look like, right? So you open the door, and what I associate with a ghost is not inside. So your valid cognizer knows the absence of ghost in your cabinet, in your closet. It contradicts, or it is contradicted by a valid cognizer. It negates ghost. Right? Okay. So it's a valid cognizer that knows, instead of knowing ghost, since it doesn't exist, it knows the non-existence of ghost. And is the non-existence of ghost a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Conventional truth, there you have it. So conventional valid cognizer that contradicts ghost. What about the cabinet's inherent existence? It's an empty cabinet, no ghost inside, but it's a cabinet. Does it exist inherently or not? Can it be known by a valid cognizer? As Kelvin said, if it exists, it can be known by a valid cognizer. Can it be known by a valid cognizer? No. Can its non-existence be known by a valid cognizer? Can the non-existence of inherent existence be known? Or can the absence of inherent existence of the cabinet be known by a valid cognizer? Just a valid cognizer. Yes. A valid cognizer can know the non-existence of inherent existence of the cabinet. Is the non-existence of the inherent existence of a cabinet a conventional truth or an ultimate truth? Okay. So the valid cognizer that knows the non-existence of the inherent existence of the cabinet, is that an ultimate valid cognizer or a conventional valid cognizer? An ultimate valid cognizer. Right? I love that she's still laughing. It's good to have humor. Humor keeps the mind light, and then it's much easier to understand it next time. The ghost, a lot of people still have followed me with the ghost. Okay. All right, yeah. So, but the ghost is fine, right? Ghost is still okay. Yeah, okay. So now, I have a valid cognizer that knows the non-existence of the ghost, and that valid cognizer I call a conventional valid cognizer. Now, forget about ghost. Inherent existence of the cabinet, the closet, it doesn't exist. It cannot be known by a valid cognizer. Can its absence be known? Can the absence or the lack as long as I use the word lack, everyone is all right. The moment I use the word non-existence, no, it's not. Can the lack of the inherent existence of the cabinet be known? When you're tired, this is no way you will not understand this tomorrow morning. No. Under the lack. Can the lack of inherent existence of the cabinet be known?
Is lack and emptiness are synonymous in this sense? Because I'm using different wording, non-existence, emptiness.
Yeah, I know.
These three are
So inherent existence is always the same. Just think inherent existence. So whether I use lack of inherent existence, or absence of inherent existence, or non-existence of inherent existence, all the same.
Emptiness, okay, and also synonymous. Empty.
Yeah, emptiness is also the lack of inherent existence, the being empty of inherent existence, the non-existence of inherent existence. All this is emptiness. Yes. So when I say can the lack of inherent existence of the cabinet be known? Yes. Can. Oh yeah, I speak like someone from Singapore. Can. I speak very Singaporean. Can. And yet there's a lot. La. Okay. All right. So it can be known. So what this mind that knows the non-existence of inherent existence, is that a conventional valid cognizer or an ultimate valid cognizer? An ultimate valid cognizer, because it knows emptiness. So does it negate the inherent existence of the cabinet?
Yes.
Right? It negates the inherent existence of the cabinet. Yeah, that's it. You got it. And even better to normal. You're tired. I mean, I know when I'm tired, I'm like, yeah, it's difficult. Yeah, you've answered it so far right. Just the last bit. I think, yeah.
Because you used the ultimate valid cognizer, the ultimate part in front. That I thought was conventional valid cognizer. So you said ultimate, you search.
Yeah, I say ultimate valid cognizer because its object is emptiness. Yeah, I said ultimate valid cognizer. So okay, I know all of you know this. You guys get confused with the words. And the thing is, in a debate, I would not be as, I don't want to say kind. I do everything to confuse you. In a debate, you do that. And if there are a lot of people around you, and you're embarrassed by all these people watching you, I'll do it even more. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of play with psychology. It's very interesting. If it's just the two of us, it's not that much fun, right? I embarrass you, but okay, big deal. But if a lot of people are watching, and I'm confusing you with the words, and everyone understands it because they have a good time watching it, so their minds are relaxed. But your mind gets like, ooh, this is a very good practice in work and controlling your mind in high-pressured situations. The psychology of debate is very interesting. Emotion regulation. Do not get angry in that situation. You won't be able to answer. You won't. Anger doesn't keep your mind calm. If you're angry in that moment, you can't be calm. You can't be calm enough to answer. So that's not an option. Emotion regulation. You need to stay focused no matter who's watching you. It may be important to you what they think, but emotion regulation. Stay calm. It's an incredible practice. And the thing is, if you make a mistake and you're embarrassed, you'll never forget the mistake. You won't. Because you remember, these people watched me and they said something so silly, you'll never forget. So it's very good for remembrance. It's very good for emotion regulation. It's very good for keeping calm in a high-pressured situation. It's perfect. Right?
Thank goodness we are not in debate with you.
Yeah. But for me it's easier because I'm talking about it the whole time. It's clear in my mind now. If you were to do the same to me, I'd be like, what did they say? Well, I have to follow. It's always easier in this situation to be the one who presents the confusing debate, because I'm aware of what I'm saying. Even then I misspeak. I have to be careful that I don't say the wrong thing. Okay. Anyway, that's fun. All right. Anyway, going back to this here. Oops. What time is it? Okay. All right. So I'll just go through this part. So the third criterion for a phenomenon to be conventionally existent is that it's not contradicted or invalidated by the correct analysis of suchness. And that's the same as saying, since such ultimate analysis gives rise to an ultimate valid cognizer, the third criterion means basically that a phenomenon is not contradicted or negated by an ultimate valid cognizer. Ultimate valid cognizers do not contradict conventional truth. That's important. They do not contradict conventional truth. They do not, even though they do not perceive conventional truth, they don't contradict them. There's a difference between not perceiving the self versus perceiving the non-existence of the self. That doesn't happen with a conventional valid cognizer. Therefore, conventional truth exists. They're not contradicted by the mind that realizes emptiness. Very important concept. They're merely not perceived by them. So, ultimate valid cognizers do not contradict conventional truths such as the self, the body, and the mind, and so forth, for there's no mind that realizes the non-existence of these phenomena, simply because they exist. Simply because they exist, so therefore the non-existence cannot be known. Likewise, ultimate valid cognizers do not then negate ultimate truth, such as the emptiness of the self, the emptiness of the body, the emptiness of the mind, and so forth, since they are realized by such a mind. They exist. Ultimate truth exists. So none of the existence, neither conventional truth nor ultimate truth, are invalidated, are contradicted by these minds. So what do they invalidate? What do they negate? These ultimate valid cognizers. All right. However, just as with conventional valid cognizers, ultimate valid cognizers are not able to negate everything that is non-existent. They cannot negate everything that is not existent. They're only able to contradict inherent existence. They're unable to negate the horns of a rabbit or anything else, the non-existence of which is a conventional truth. Right? Previously, with the conventional valid cognizers, they were able to contradict non-existences, such as horns of a rabbit, permanent situations, because their non-existence is a conventional truth. Here's the reverse case. In the case of ultimate valid cognizers, they cannot know the non-existence of horns of a rabbit or the non-existence of my body being permanent. They can only know the non-existence of inherent existence. All right, now I think everyone got it. This is because conventional truth do not fall within the cognitive domain of ultimate minds. That is very important. They are different cognitive domains. Just as my eye consciousness has a different cognitive domain than my ear consciousness. That doesn't mean sounds don't exist, because it doesn't mean, therefore, sounds don't exist just because my eye consciousness doesn't perceive them. Likewise, it doesn't mean conventional truth don't exist simply because my ultimate mind or our ultimate minds do not exist conventional truth. That's very important. They just fall into different cognitive domains. Yeah? All right. And again, you have the illustration. Your homework is to look at that illustration. Please take a look at these two. It's not that long. It's a lunar day, I know. And today is the day to go to the mall and so forth. And you still showed up. So, the lunar day, right? I've been told that today is a special day. Families get, pardon?
Beaver moon.
Which moon?
Beaver moon.
A beaver moon? What is a beaver moon?
It's a super moon.
Super moon.
Super moon. Today's a super moon?
Yeah.
Oh, it's not just a full moon, but it's a super full moon. Wow, okay. All right. So even more reason. But still, you're okay. So that's amazing. So anyway, but please look at these illustrations if you don't mind. Okay. Oh, and you see, I forgot to highlight the knot in these little boxes on page 39. Previously, I highlighted or put into bold letters the not. Where's the not? Oh yeah, here's not contradicted. I did that previously, but I forgot to do it here. I can still do it and send it you the new version. Yeah, it's okay. All right. Anyway, therefore, for something to exist conventionally, it has to satisfy all three criteria. Okay, so in summary, for something to exist conventionally, it has to satisfy all three criteria. If it only had to satisfy the first and second criteria, inherent existence would absurdly exist conventionally. Right? If it only had to fulfill the first and the second criterion, conventionally inherent existence would exist. If it only had to satisfy the first and the third criteria, the horns of a rabbit would exist. So the third criterion precludes inherent existence from existing conventionally, and the second criterion precludes everything else that does not exist. Does that make sense? Yeah. Again, your mind is not trained in that way, that's all. Unless you had some training already, then it's easy for you. But it's just, that's the good news. Neuroplasticity. Anyone can know this. If I can know it, everyone can know it. I'm so average, if not below average, when it comes to intelligence. So that's why I really like teaching it, because usually most people know better than me, they're cleverer than me. So I have the confidence that everyone can understand it if I can understand it. That's why it's fun to teach it. But that you're confused now, this is little in comparison to how long I would be confused. Anyway, so that was the summary of this. And all we're left with is the last section, which is basically dealing with the true truth. Now, from the point of view of those who've eliminated ignorance. Now, we've heard conventional truth are conventional truth because they're truth for ignorance. They're truth for ignorance. But if you don't have ignorance, what are conventional truth for you? If you no longer have ignorance, then a table is not a truth for your ignorance. It's not a truth for a concealer. If you don't have ignorance. Right now, I have ignorance, therefore, this table is a truth for my ignorance. From the perspective of my ignorance, which plays a huge part in my life, in my perception, this is a conventional truth. In other words, it's a truth for a concealer. If I no longer have ignorance, what happens? I no longer have ignorance. If not only, well, the phenomena still appear to me exist inherently. However, I know that that appearance is an illusion. It doesn't, or it's like an illusion. It doesn't exist the way it appears, right? So if I know that, then how do I view conventional truth? And that is described in terms of the three types of arhats. Who are the three types of arhats? What does it mean to be an arhat, first of all? Who is an arhat? How would you define an arhat?
One who is free of the afflictive obscuration.
Someone who's free of the afflictive obscurations. So it means, in other words, we distinguish, when we talk about Buddhahood, for instance, Buddhahood. We talk about Buddhahood. Remember I said Buddhahood is like eliminating that which is extra in our mind. Right? So eliminating the obscurations. But we can divide the obscurations into two. The root misperception, our root misconception, and all the other mental afflictions that this root misconception gives rise to, plus the potential of these the potential of these afflictions to arise in our continuum. Right now, we don't have anger. Right now, we don't have resentment, for instance. I don't think any of you is angry or resentful. But does that mean you still have the potential for these minds to arise? Yes. So you still have afflictive obscurations because you have one of the two. Either you have the active mental afflictions in your continuum, and right now in the case of anger that's not true, but you have the seed still. So these you can eliminate first. These obscurations you eliminate first. And when you've eliminated those first, goes first. Then you have become an arhat. You've become liberated. You're liberated. But these afflictions, they always leave imprints. And every time they arise, they leave something, a residue in our mind. So this residue, those imprints, can only be removed after you've become an arhat, after you've eliminated the root ignorance. You still have the imprints left. And when you remove the imprints, then you're Buddha. Therefore, there's two goals, just to summarize again. And so the question is, when you remove only the afflictions, only the root ignorance together with the seed, being an arhat, how do you perceive conventional truth? Because you no longer have ignorance. And then how does a Buddha perceive conventional truth? Right? So that's what we're going to discuss at the very end. Because we are in the very beginning, we aim for Buddhahood. So even though understanding what a Buddha is actually beyond our understanding, but having a rough sense of it, learning about it is helpful because it moves us in the right direction. Right? So we don't go totally astray, having some weird sense of what a Buddha means and then act accordingly. Right? Okay. Anyway, so let's leave it at that because, it is quite late and to start this now, there's no point. So we've got a little bit more time tomorrow. So it's at 2, is that right? What time does it start tomorrow? At 2, right? Yeah. All right, so we meet again tomorrow at 2. We've got a whole afternoon and we'll definitely finish this. Okay, great. So all that remains is, of course, to take the last moments of strength we still have after a long day and to make sure we dedicate whatever positive potential we've accumulated. So by thinking, may this get together today, may us getting together and learning and reflecting on the true truth, especially what it means to exist conventionally, enable us to eventually overcome not only the obstructions to liberation, but also the obstructions to full awakening. So that then will be of the greatest benefit to all sentient beings, and that we're then able to also guide them to reach liberation or enlightenment. So with that in mind, let's recite the dedication prayer.
Sancho Rinpoche, Ake Panam Kikyoshi, Kewa Nyamba Mepaya, Kone Kondu Pevashi.